There was nothing unusual about the Okeke family at first glance. To the neighbors, they were the picture of success. Their house was big, with white walls and a garden that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Chinedu and Ngozi, the parents, were always dressed well and went out to fancy events. They were respected in their community, always seen at church and social gatherings, smiling and shaking hands. Their life looked perfect from the outside, a dream that anyone would want to be a part of. But inside that house, behind the big gates and the fancy furniture, things were different. Things no one could see. The truth was hidden, locked away where no one could find it. And the only one who knew the truth was Toby. Toby wasn't a person. He wasn't a kid or an adult. He was a dog, an Alsatian with sharp eyes, a strong build, and a deep loyalty to the family he had watched for years. He had seen things that no one should ever see, especially not a child, and his eyes had never forgotten. His loyalty to his owners was unquestionable, but he knew something no one else did. The Okekes weren't the perfect family they pretended to be. The truth was darker. It had been years since Toby had first arrived at the Okeke home. At first, he had been just another pet, but over time he had become more than that. He was their protector, their guard dog, always alert to anything that might threaten his family. And there had been threats, things Toby couldn't understand at the time. He just knew that something was off. Something wasn't right. The first time he saw it, he was only a young pup. Chike, the Okeke's first son, had been running around in the yard, laughing and playing, just like any other child would. But that laughter quickly turned into crying. Toby had heard the shouting first, then the harsh words that came from Chinedu's mouth. He had seen Chike try to run, try to escape, but it didn't matter. Chinedu had grabbed the boy, holding him too tightly. The next thing Toby knew, he was watching the lifeless body of Chike being dragged into the house. He didn't understand why at the time. He only knew that something was wrong. Chinedu and Ngozi had made it look like an accident. They said that Chike had fallen down the stairs, hit his head, and died. The neighbors believed them. The family believed them. But not Toby. Toby had been there. He had seen the truth. As the years went on, Toby stayed loyal to his owners, watching them carefully. He kept his distance but never took his eyes off them. He had seen the way Chinedu's temper flared when things didn't go his way. He had heard the sound of Ngozi's voice rise when things were bad. He had seen Emeka, their new son, be born into a home that had already been stained by tragedy. Emeka was different from Chike. He was smaller, quieter, and more delicate. Toby could see it from the moment Emeka was brought home. The baby was precious, but there was something else there too. There was a danger. Toby knew that whatever had happened to Chike could happen again. It wasn't that Chinedu and Ngozi were bad people, at least not in the way most people thought of bad people. They weren't criminals or thieves. They didn't do anything that would make them stand out in the eyes of the community. But Toby knew what they were capable of. He had seen it before, and now, with Emeka in the house, he was seeing it again. Toby had always been protective of Emeka. The baby had never known what Toby had seen, but he sensed that Toby was always there, watching over him. Whenever Emeka cried, Toby would sit by the crib, watching with his dark eyes, making sure nothing would harm the child. He would bark if anyone got too close, warning them that the baby was his responsibility now. And Emeka, innocent and unaware, would giggle as if he understood that Toby was his protector. But one day, Toby noticed something that made his fur stand on end. It was just another argument between Chinedu and Ngozi. It wasn't the first time they had fought, but it felt different. Toby could hear the anger in their voices, the sharpness in their words. Ngozi was yelling at Chinedu about how Emeka was spoiled, how he needed discipline. Chinedu, in turn, was frustrated with how hard it was to make Emeka behave. They were both saying things that made Toby uneasy. "You're doing it wrong," Ngozi shouted. "If you don't make him behave, he'll grow up to be like Chike. A weak, useless child." Toby froze. He knew that name. Chike, the memory of that day, the day everything had changed, came rushing back. Toby's stomach twisted, and his heart raced. He had heard that name before, but this time it was different. This time, Chinidu and Ngozi's anger wasn't just at each other. It was at Emeka, too. Toby's instincts kicked in. He knew that something needed to be done. He couldn't let history repeat itself. He couldn't let Emeka suffer the same fate as Chike. Toby had been silent for so long, but now he had to act. He had to protect the child he had come to love and care for. As Chinidu raised his voice once more, Toby made up his mind. Without another thought, he ran to the baby's crib. Emeka was asleep, unaware of the tension in the house. Toby nudged the crib with his nose, careful not to wake him. He picked the baby up in his mouth, just like he had done many times before, and started moving toward the door. It wasn't the first time Toby had taken Emeka away from the room to quiet the baby, but this time was different. This time, Toby was leaving and he wasn't coming back. He ran through the door and into the night. The Okekes didn't notice at first. They were too busy shouting at each other, too consumed with their anger. But when the silence hit, it was too much to ignore. Chinidu and Ngozi turned around, and that's when they saw that their baby was gone. "Where is he?" Ngozi screamed, looking around the room, panicked. "Where's Emeka?" Toby was already gone, moving fast through the yard and down the street, carrying Emeka to safety. He had to get to someone who would protect the child. Someone who wouldn't let him fall into the same trap that had taken Chike. Toby knew exactly where to go. He ran to Auntie Nkechi, the one person he could trust. Auntie Nkechi wasn't just another member of the community. She was family, a kind woman who had always loved the children of the Okeke household. She had always kept her distance, but she had been kind to Chike when he was alive, and she had been just as kind to Emeka. Toby knew that she was the only one who would understand. As Toby arrived at Auntie Nkechi's house, the front door was open, and he nudged it open with his nose. She was sitting in the living room, knitting, when she looked up and saw Toby standing there with Emeka in his mouth. She gasped, standing up quickly. "Toby, what's going on?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. Toby didn't bark. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. Auntie Nkechi stepped forward, taking the baby gently from Toby's mouth. "What happened?" she whispered to the dog, looking back at the house where he had come from. Toby sat back on his haunches, his eyes never leaving Auntie Nkechi's face. He had done what he could. Now it was her turn to keep Emeka safe. Auntie Nkechi looked down at the baby in her arms. Emeka was still asleep, completely unaware of the danger he had been in just hours before. She could feel the weight of the responsibility in her hands, and with that weight came a feeling of deep concern. Something wasn't right. Toby, the Okeke family dog, had never acted like this before. He had been protective, but this was different. He wasn't just playing around or looking after the baby as he always did. There was something about tonight, something urgent in his eyes that told Auntie Nkechi this wasn't a simple rescue. As she stood there, holding Emeka close, Toby was pacing back and forth, watching her. His usual calm demeanor was gone. The dog was nervous, his ears flicking at every sound. His body language told Auntie Nkechi everything she needed to know. This wasn't just a pet acting out. Toby had seen something that made him act in a way that Auntie Nkechi couldn't ignore. "What is it?" she whispered softly to the dog, though she knew he couldn't answer. Toby's eyes locked onto her, and she felt an odd chill run through her. She needed to know what was going on. The question that had been in her mind since Toby had arrived with the baby now felt more pressing. What had happened at the Okeke house? Why had Toby stolen Emeka away in the middle of the night? Auntie Nkechi moved slowly, sitting down on the old wooden chair in the corner of her living room, cradling Emeka in her lap. Toby stopped pacing and sat at her feet, still alert but calmer now that he knew the baby was safe. She stared at the baby's innocent face, the peaceful sleep that was too good for someone so young. But Emeka was innocent. He had no idea what had been happening in that house, and she had to make sure he never had to face it. As she watched him, she remembered Chike, the Okeke's first child, the little boy that had seemed so full of life. She had loved Chike, even though he had been difficult to handle sometimes, but she hadn't seen him in years. She had visited the Okekes once when he was about 5, and he had run into her arms, asking her to play with him. He was always full of energy, so happy. And then, Chike had been gone. Just like that. The Okekes had said it was an accident. They had told everyone he had fallen down the stairs. They'd even had a small funeral, and the neighbors had said their goodbyes. But Auntie Nkechi had always felt something wasn't right. No one had really asked questions. The Okekes were powerful people in the community. Chinedu was well-liked, and Ngozi had her social status. Who would question them? Who would ask why such a young child had died in a way that didn't seem to make sense? Toby was the only one who knew. He had been there. He had seen what had really happened. Auntie Nkechi's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside her door. She turned her head, expecting the worst. But it wasn't the Okekes, thank goodness. It was her neighbor, Uncle Obi, who had come to check in on her. He was a kind man, but Auntie Nkechi wasn't sure she was ready to talk about what was happening. She didn't want to say anything yet. Not until she understood it better herself. "Good evening, Auntie Nkechi," Uncle Obi said as he knocked gently on the door before entering. "Is everything all right? I saw Toby running past my house earlier. Is Emeka here with you?" Auntie Nkechi smiled weakly. "Yes, Uncle Obi. Emeka is fine. It's just, Toby brought him here tonight. There's been some trouble, but don't worry. The baby is safe." Uncle Obi raised his eyebrows. "Trouble? What kind of trouble? I heard voices from the Okeke house earlier, loud voices. What's going on?" Auntie Nkechi hesitated for a moment, looking at Toby. The dog was sitting quietly now, his eyes still sharp, but he was calm, waiting for her next move. She had to be careful. The Okekes were well respected, and if she said too much too soon, she might end up in a situation that she wasn't ready for. But Uncle Obi was her friend, and he deserved to know something. "Uncle Obi," she started softly, "you remember Chike, right? The Okeke's first child?" He nodded. "Of course. A beautiful boy. Tragic accident, wasn't it?" Auntie Nkechi's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know. I don't think it was an accident, Obi. And now I'm worried about Emeka. I think they might be doing the same thing to him. Chinedu and Ngozi, they're not what they seem." Uncle Obi's face darkened. "What are you saying? Are you sure? Are you saying they hurt Chike?" Auntie Nkechi nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what happened that day, but Toby does. Toby was there, and he knows the truth." The room fell silent. Uncle Obi's eyes widened in disbelief. He had always respected the Okekes, but what Auntie Nkechi was saying now was hard to accept. "Are you suggesting they killed Chike?" Uncle Obi asked, his voice shaking. Auntie Nkechi looked down at Emeka, still asleep in her arms. She looked back at Toby, who was sitting at her feet, his gaze never leaving her. "I don't know for sure, but I think they did. And I think they might hurt Emeka too, if we don't do something." Uncle Obi took a step back. This is serious, Auntie Nkechi. If the Okekes really did something to their own son, they'll stop at nothing to cover it up. They're powerful people, and you know how the community looks at them." Auntie Nkechi's eyes hardened. "I don't care about their power anymore. I care about this baby. I can't sit here and pretend like nothing's happening. Something is wrong, Obi. Something very wrong." Toby let out a soft growl, as though agreeing with her. Auntie Nkechi stood up slowly, rocking Emeka gently in her arms. She walked to the window and peered outside, making sure no one was watching. "Uncle Obi, I need your help," she said, her voice firm. "I need you to help me figure out what happened to Chike. We can't let Emeka go back there. Not after what I've seen tonight." Uncle Obi nodded, his face serious now. "All right, Auntie Nkechi, I'll help you. We need to be careful, though. If we dig into this, we could be in danger." Auntie Nkechi clenched her jaw. "I'm not afraid. Not anymore." She walked back to her chair and sat down again, her eyes still fixed on Toby. "We'll start tomorrow. We'll talk to the neighbors, ask the right questions. If the Okekes are hiding something, we'll find out. And Emeka will never have to go back there." The night dragged on, but nothing else was said. Auntie Nkechi knew what had to be done. The investigation would begin soon, and she would make sure Emeka was safe, no matter what it took. But deep down, she was terrified. What if she was wrong? What if everything was just a mistake? But something in her gut told her that Toby had seen something, and she couldn't ignore it. The truth would come out. It always did. The morning after Auntie Nkechi had spoken with Uncle Obi was tense. A thick silence hung in the air as if the world was holding its breath. Emeka was still asleep, peaceful and unaware of the danger he had narrowly escaped. Toby sat beside Auntie Nkechi, keeping a watchful eye on the baby, who lay on a small cot near her chair. She couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, wondering if Emeka's life would ever be truly normal again. But there was no time to dwell on that now. There was work to do. Today was the day they would get to the truth, the day they would find out what really happened to Chaik and, most importantly, keep Emeka safe. But Auntie Nkechi knew it wouldn't be easy. The Okekes were powerful, well-connected, and they wouldn't take kindly to anyone digging into their past. But she had to try. She couldn't let Emeka be their next victim. Auntie Nkechi, what are we going to do now? Uncle Obi asked, breaking her thoughts. He had arrived early that morning, as promised, ready to help her. He stood near the door, his eyes shifting nervously between her and Toby. We start by asking questions, Auntie Nkechi said quietly, her voice filled with determination. We need to talk to the neighbors who were around when Chaik died. Someone must have seen something. If the Okekes have been hiding something this whole time, someone will know. Uncle Obi nodded, though doubt was written all over his face. You really think someone will speak up? After all this time? I don't care if it's been years, Auntie Nkechi said, standing up from her chair. People talk. If the Okekes have been covering up the truth, it's only a matter of time before it catches up with them. But we can't waste any more time. Toby barked once, a sharp, warning bark that startled Auntie Nkechi. She looked down at him. The dog's eyes were focused, almost as if he was trying to say something. Auntie Nkechi smiled at Toby, though her heart ached at the thought of what the dog had witnessed. He had seen things no one should have to see. We're going to get to the truth, Toby. I promise you. With a final nod to Uncle Obi, Auntie Nkechi left her house, Emeka still safely in her arms. Toby followed close behind, never straying too far from her side. They walked through the streets of their neighborhood, each step heavier than the last. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. If the truth came out, things would never be the same again. But it had to come out. The Okekes couldn't keep hiding their dark secret. As they walked toward the old house where Chaik had lived, Auntie Nkechi couldn't help but think back to that day, the day Chaik had been taken from them. She remembered the funeral, the empty look in Chinedu's eyes as he stood beside his wife, looking like the perfect grieving parents. The whole town had pitied them. They had all believed the lie. When they reached the Okeke house, things seemed eerily quiet. The large gates were closed, and no one was in sight. Auntie Nkechi paused at the gate, her mind racing. The place had once been filled with laughter, with children running around, playing in the yard. But now it felt empty. She could almost feel the weight of Chaik's memory pressing down on her. She had to remind herself that they were there for Emeka, for his safety. The Okekes had to answer for what they had done. We'll start by asking the neighbors, Auntie Nkechi said, looking at Uncle Obi. Let's see if anyone remembers anything about that day. Uncle Obi nodded. I'll talk to the man who lives next door. He's been here a long time. He might know something. Auntie Nkechi gave him a quick smile. I'll talk to the woman across the street. She was close with Chaik. She might have seen something. With a final glance at the Okeke house, they split up, each heading in a different direction. Auntie Nkechi walked slowly, her footsteps echoing in the quiet streets. She reached the door of Mama Joy, the elderly woman who lived across from the Okekes, and knocked gently. After a moment, the door opened. Mama Joy's wrinkled face appeared in the doorway, her eyes squinting at the sun. Auntie Nkechi, what brings you here today? Good morning, Mama Joy, Auntie Nkechi said with a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. I need to ask you something about Chaik. You remember him, don't you? Mama Joy's expression immediately shifted. She stepped aside, motioning for Auntie Nkechi to come in. Of course I remember Chaik. Such a sweet boy. Such a tragedy when he passed away. Auntie Nkechi followed her inside, her heart heavy. She could already feel the tension in the room, like they were treading on dangerous ground. Mama Joy, you were close with the Okekes, right? Close, Mama Joy said with a small laugh. Oh yes, I was. Chinedu and Ngozi always came to me for advice, especially when it came to the children. They were good people, good parents. Auntie Nkechi's stomach twisted at the words. She couldn't bring herself to ask directly yet, not without knowing what she was dealing with. You were there when Chaik passed away, right? What happened that day? Was it really an accident? Mama Joy's face darkened. She looked down at the floor, avoiding Auntie Nkechi's gaze. It was a terrible accident, Auntie Nkechi. I don't know what happened exactly, but I heard the loud noise from outside. The Okekes, they were devastated. They said he fell. Auntie Nkechi's heart raced. The lie. It was all lies. She pressed on, refusing to let it go. But, you didn't see anything unusual? Any arguments, maybe? Or something strange? Mama Joy hesitated for a long moment before speaking again. Well, she glanced toward the window, her voice dropping to a whisper. I did hear them arguing the night before. Chinedu and Ngozi. It wasn't the first time, but that night, their voices were louder than usual. I heard them shouting at Chaik, and the boy was crying. Auntie Nkechi's blood ran cold. She hadn't expected to hear this. Crying? What was he crying about? Mama Joy shook her head. I don't know. I didn't want to get involved. It wasn't my place. But it wasn't right. I thought maybe Chinedu had just lost his temper again. He's always been a hothead. Auntie Nkechi swallowed hard, feeling the weight of what she had just heard. And the next day, you didn't hear anything? No sounds, no commotion. No, Mama Joy said, her voice quivering. I didn't hear anything that day. It was just so quiet. When the ambulance came, I thought they would be okay. But then I saw Chinedu's face. I knew something was wrong. He didn't look like a man who had lost his son. He looked like a man who was hiding something. Auntie Nkechi didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Mama Joy's words spoke for themselves. She had just confirmed what Auntie Nkechi had been fearing all along. Thank you, Mama Joy, Auntie Nkechi said softly, her voice filled with sadness. She stood up, ready to leave. I appreciate your honesty. As she walked out of Mama Joy's house, her mind was racing. She had just learned more than she had hoped for. Chinedu and Ngozi had been lying, and now, she had a reason to believe that Chaik's death had not been an accident. It had been something worse. Auntie Nkechi's stomach turned at the thought. She met Uncle Obi at the corner of the street. His face was tight, his brow furrowed. Did you hear anything? He asked, his voice low. I heard enough, Auntie Nkechi said, her voice filled with a quiet anger. Chaik didn't die by accident. He was hurt and they covered it up. It wasn't just a fall. Uncle Obi's face went pale. What are we going to do now? We keep going, Auntie Nkechi said firmly. We can't stop. We have to protect Emeka no matter what. Toby, who had been quietly sitting beside them, let out a soft growl. It was as if he knew the fight was just beginning. And it was. There was no turning back now. Auntie Nkechi had uncovered the first piece of the puzzle. But she knew it was only the beginning. The truth was closer, but so was the danger. Auntie Nkechi's heart was still racing as she left Mama Joy's house. The words the elderly woman had said echoed in her mind. Chinedu didn't look like a man who had lost his son. He looked like a man who was hiding something. It was the confirmation she had needed, but it also made her feel cold inside. She had suspected something had happened to Chaik, but hearing it out loud made it so much more real. The thought of Chinedu and Ngozi causing harm to their own child, to anyone, was almost too much to bear. But now there was no turning back. She had to protect Emeka, no matter what. Toby had been walking silently beside her, his head low, his eyes constantly scanning the area as though he, too, could sense the growing danger. Auntie Nkechi was grateful for the dog's presence. He had proven to be a true protector, and it was clear that he would do anything to make sure Emeka was safe. Uncle Obi should have finished by now, Auntie Nkechi muttered to herself, her thoughts still whirling with the new information. She needed to find him. She needed to know if he had learned anything useful from the man next door. Just as she turned the corner onto the street where Uncle Obi had gone, she saw him standing by the front gate of the Okeke house, looking over his shoulder. His eyes met hers, and his face darkened. "We need to talk," Uncle Obi said, his voice tight. Auntie Nkechi's stomach sank. "What did you find out?" Uncle Obi hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's worse than we thought, Auntie Nkechi. The neighbor next door. He didn't just hear the argument that night. He saw something. He saw Chinedu carrying Chike inside, and the boy wasn't moving. He wasn't even crying. He said it looked like Chinedu was holding a lifeless body." Auntie Nkechi felt the blood drain from her face. "What?" She could hardly speak, the words barely able to leave her mouth. "But that means—" "I know," Uncle Obi interrupted. "It means it wasn't just an accident. Chike didn't fall. Something happened before that." Her breath hitched. This was it. This was the proof she needed. But it didn't make it any easier to hear. Chike had been hurt, maybe even killed, and the Okekes had lied about it. They'd gotten away with it for so long, and now, with Emeka in danger, it felt like everything was about to fall apart. "We can't let Emeka go back there," Uncle Obi said firmly. "We need to make sure he stays safe, Auntie Nkechi. Whatever the Okekes did, they'll do it again if they get the chance." "I know," she whispered, clutching Emeka tightly to her chest. "But we can't just run. We need evidence. We need people to listen." "We can't wait for them to listen," Uncle Obi argued, his face hard. "The Okekes are too powerful. They'll shut us down before we even get started. We need to act now." Auntie Nkechi looked down at Emeka. He was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. She knew Uncle Obi was right, but it felt wrong to be rushing into things. They needed a plan, not just more fear and anger. "We'll talk to the police," Auntie Nkechi said, more to herself than to Uncle Obi. "But first, we need to make sure the Okekes can't get to Emeka. If they think he's still here, they'll come for him. We have to get him out of sight." She looked at Uncle Obi. His face was grim, but he nodded. "Where do we take him?" "Not far," she said, thinking quickly. "I'll take him to the church. Pastor Emmanuel is there today. He's always been kind to me and the kids. He'll keep Emeka safe until we can figure out what to do next." Uncle Obi frowned. "Are you sure? The church is close to the Okeke house. They'll find out sooner or later." "I know," she said, "but right now it's the safest place. No one will look for him there." Toby barked, as though agreeing, and Auntie Nkechi smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We need to move quickly. I don't want to take any chances." They both turned and started walking in the direction of the church, Toby close at their heels. Auntie Nkechi felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She had done the right thing by bringing Emeka to safety. But as they approached the church, the worry returned. They needed to act fast before anyone realized what was happening. When they arrived at the church, the gates were open, and Pastor Emmanuel was outside, standing near the entrance, talking to someone. Auntie Nkechi's heart began to race. This was the moment. Pastor Emmanuel turned as he saw them approaching. He smiled when he saw her but stopped when he noticed the baby in her arms. "Auntie Nkechi, what's going on?" Auntie Nkechi hesitated for only a moment before she stepped forward. "Pastor Emmanuel, I need your help. There's been a terrible mistake. I'm afraid Emeka isn't safe. I need you to take him, keep him here. Don't let anyone know where he is." Pastor Emmanuel's brow furrowed with confusion. "What are you talking about? What happened?" She looked around quickly, making sure no one was nearby. "It's the Okekes. They've been hiding something. Chike, their first son, didn't die in an accident. And now they're trying to hurt Emeka." Pastor Emmanuel's eyes widened with shock. "What do you mean? This doesn't make sense." "I know," she said quickly, glancing at Toby, who was sitting nearby, his eyes fixed on the pastor. "But we have to keep Emeka safe. I don't have time to explain it all now. The Okekes will come looking for him, and if they find him, they'll take him back." Pastor Emmanuel stared at her for a moment before he nodded, as if deciding to trust her. All right, I'll keep him here. You have my word. But you have to be careful. This is bigger than just a family dispute. I know, Auntie Nkechi said. That's why I need you to keep him hidden. No one can know where he is. Not until I figure out what to do next. Pastor Emmanuel nodded again. We'll keep him safe. You have my word. Auntie Nkechi felt a small wave of relief. At least Emeka was safe for now. But the truth was still out there, and the Okekes were still a threat. They couldn't keep running forever. I'll be back soon, she said, her voice heavy with worry. Stay here, keep him safe, and don't let anyone know about him, especially not the Okekes. As she turned to leave, Pastor Emmanuel called out, Be careful, Auntie Nkechi. This isn't just a small matter anymore. You're dealing with dangerous people. She didn't need him to remind her of that. She already knew. She just hoped she could get to the truth before it was too late. The sun was beginning to set when Auntie Nkechi made her way back to the Okeke house. She had left Emeka in Pastor Emmanuel's care, feeling a small sense of relief. He was safe, at least for now. But her heart was still heavy with the knowledge that the real fight was just beginning. The Okekes were powerful, and she was up against them. But this wasn't just about Emeka anymore. This was about justice for Chike. She had spoken to Mama Joy, and Uncle Obi had done his part, talking to the neighbors. Auntie Nkechi had learned more than she expected, but there was still so much more to uncover. She couldn't let the Okekes get away with what they had done to Chike. She had to dig deeper. As she approached the Okeke house, her nerves tightened. There was no turning back now. She had to face them. Toby walked beside her. As always, his sharp eyes scanning every movement, every sound. He was alert, and Auntie Nkechi could feel his protective presence beside her. The dog was ready for whatever was coming. When they reached the gates of the Okeke house, Auntie Nkechi paused. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had to stay calm. She couldn't let them see her fear. She knocked on the door. It didn't take long for Ngozi to appear. She opened the door with a tight smile, though her eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and wariness when she saw Auntie Nkechi standing there. Auntie Nkechi, what are you doing here? Ngozi asked, her voice colder than usual. Is everything all right? I need to speak with you, Auntie Nkechi said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. It's about Chike. The mention of her first son's name made Ngozi's expression falter for a brief moment, but she quickly regained control. What about Chike? I know what happened to him. Ngozi, Auntie Nkechi said bluntly, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. I know the truth about his death. Ngozi stiffened. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, the truth? She asked, her voice tight, controlled. I know he didn't just fall, Auntie Nkechi said, stepping forward. I know Chinedu hurt him. I know you both hurt him. For a moment, the air between them was thick with tension. Ngozi's lips pressed into a thin line, and her gaze flicked to Toby, who was standing quietly by Auntie Nkechi's side. The dog's presence made her uneasy, and Auntie Nkechi could tell that she was already thinking about how to handle the situation. You don't know what you're talking about, Ngozi snapped, trying to regain some control over the conversation. Chike's death was an accident, Auntie Nkechi. It was a terrible accident. There's nothing more to say. Auntie Nkechi shook her head. I don't believe that, Ngozi. Not anymore. I spoke to Mama Joy. She heard you and Chinedu fighting that night. She heard Chike crying, and she heard you both shouting at him. Ngozi's face went pale. She quickly looked away, as if the mention of that night was too much to bear. You're lying, she said weakly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I'm not lying, Auntie Nkechi said firmly. I spoke to the neighbors. I know what happened. You and Chinedu tried to cover it up, but the truth is coming out. You don't know anything, Ngozi spat, her anger rising. You have no idea what it was like for us. Chike was a troublemaker and we did what we had to do. You don't understand, Auntie Nkechi. You don't understand what it's like to raise a child like him. Auntie Nkechi's stomach turned at her words. You're lying, Ngozi. You didn't do what you had to do. You hurt him. You killed him. And now you're trying to do the same thing to Emeka. At the mention of her second child's name, Ngozi's face hardened, her eyes flashing with fear and rage. Leave my son out of this, she warned, stepping forward and blocking the doorway. I won't let you accuse me of anything. I'm not accusing you, Ngozi, Auntie Nkechi said, her voice calm but firm. I'm trying to protect Emeka. If you hurt him the way you hurt Chike, I'll make sure the truth comes out. You won't get away with it this time. Ngozi's jaw clenched. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, they both heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. Auntie Nkechi's heart skipped a beat as she turned, instinctively stepping in front of Toby, trying to block the way. It was Chinedu. He was walking towards them with a stern expression, his eyes narrowing as he saw Auntie Nkechi standing on his doorstep. What is going on here? Chinedu asked, his voice low and dangerous. Why are you bothering my wife? I'm not bothering anyone, Auntie Nkechi said calmly, though her heart was pounding in her chest. I'm here because I know the truth. I know what happened to Chike, and I'm not going to let you hurt Emeka. Chinedu's eyes flashed with anger. You know nothing, he said, his voice rising. You've been talking to the wrong people, Auntie Nkechi. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. I know enough, Auntie Nkechi said. I know you killed your son, and I know you're going to hurt Emeka too if I don't stop you. Toby growled low in his throat, his teeth bared, ready to protect Auntie Nkechi and Emeka at all costs. The tension between the three of them was palpable, and for a moment, it felt like the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Chinedu stepped closer, his face twisted in fury. You have no right to come here and accuse me of something like that, he said, his voice shaking with barely contained rage. You don't know what it's like to raise a child like Chike. He was wild, uncontrollable, and… No, Auntie Nkechi cut him off sharply. You were the one who was wild. You were the one who lost control. You hurt him and now you're trying to cover it up. But I won't let you hurt Emeka too. Chinedu's eyes flared with anger. But Auntie Nkechi didn't back down. She knew she couldn't. If she did, she might never get another chance to expose the truth. You've already taken one life, Auntie Nkechi said, her voice steady but filled with quiet anger. I won't let you take another. Chinedu stood there for a moment, his face hard, as if he was weighing his options. He looked at Ngozi, who was standing by the door, her expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and threatening. You should leave. Now. Auntie Nkechi didn't flinch. She stood tall, her resolve stronger than ever. I'm not going anywhere, Chinedu. Not until I get the truth. And not until I make sure Emeka is safe. The air between them crackled with tension. Chinedu took one final look at her, then turned on his heel and walked back into the house without saying another word. Auntie Nkechi stood there for a moment, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had confronted them, and they knew she was onto them. But she hadn't expected them to give in so easily. Something was off. She couldn't let her guard down now. This was only the beginning. As Auntie Nkechi turned to leave, she felt a rush of uncertainty. What would they do next? What would the Okekes do to protect their secrets? She didn't know, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't back down. And neither would Toby. The night after her confrontation with Chinedu and Ngozi, Auntie Nkechi couldn't sleep. The words they had spoken to her echoed in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of their cold expressions and their refusal to acknowledge the truth. She knew now, more than ever, that Emeka's safety depended on her finding the evidence that would expose the Okekes for what they were. She had to protect him, no matter the cost. As the sun began to rise, Auntie Nkechi found herself pacing in her small living room, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her chest. She couldn't do this alone. She needed more than just the suspicion she had. She needed proof. The neighbors, Mama Joy, Uncle Obi, and others, had given her pieces of the puzzle, but there was still a big gap she couldn't fill. Toby was lying quietly by the door, his eyes following her every move. He seemed to sense her worry, and his steady presence was a small comfort. Auntie Nkechi finally stopped pacing and sat down on the old wooden chair near the window. She needed to think clearly, to plan. She had no choice but to dig deeper. She had to find more people who had been there, who might have witnessed something that could help her put the pieces together. She stood up again, feeling a renewed sense of determination. She had to go back to the heart of the matter the night Chaik had died. Someone must have seen something. Someone must have heard something. Auntie Nkechi grabbed her jacket and turned to Toby. "We're going back," she said softly. "I need to talk to some more people. We can't stop until we find the truth." A few hours later, Auntie Nkechi was standing in front of Musa, a man who had lived next door to the Okekes for many years. He was a quiet, hard-working man who had always kept to himself. But Auntie Nkechi knew he was the type of person who would have noticed anything unusual. If anyone had seen what happened that night, it would be him. She knocked on the door, and after a moment, Musa opened it. His face was friendly but tired, and he blinked when he saw Auntie Nkechi standing there. "Auntie Nkechi, what brings you here today?" Musa asked, his voice warm but curious. "I need to ask you about something," she said, her voice low. "It's about Chaik, and what happened the night he died." Musa's expression changed almost immediately. He stepped aside to let her in. "Please come in," he said. "I've been wondering when you would come around to ask. It's not an easy thing to talk about." Auntie Nkechi nodded as she walked in, sitting down on the small couch in his living room. Toby followed her, sitting beside her, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. Musa sat across from her, his hands folded in his lap, as if bracing himself for a difficult conversation. "Musa, I need to know what happened that night," Auntie Nkechi said, her voice steady but urgent. "I know you heard something. You must have. Please, tell me what you know." Musa looked down for a moment, his lips tight. Then he sighed heavily and looked up at her. "I didn't see it clearly, Auntie Nkechi, but I heard it. The arguing. It was so loud that night. Chinedu and Ngozi were shouting at each other, and Chaik was crying. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but the anger, the fear in Chaik's voice, I couldn't ignore it." Auntie Nkechi felt a lump in her throat. This was it. This was the confirmation she had been hoping for. "What happened next?" she pressed, her eyes on Musa's face. "I heard them fighting for a while," Musa continued, his voice quiet now. "Then, everything went still. The house was quiet for a long time, and I didn't hear Chaik anymore. I thought maybe he had just fallen asleep. But then I heard the sound of someone running. Chinedu ran out of the house and went to his car. He was in a hurry, like he was trying to get away from something. I saw him through the window. I couldn't see exactly what he was doing, but I knew something was wrong." Auntie Nkechi's heart pounded in her chest. This was what she needed. This was the missing piece. "What happened after that?" she asked urgently. "Did you see anything else?" Musa hesitated. "I didn't see anything else, Auntie Nkechi, but I saw them later at the hospital. Chinedu and Ngozi came in with Chaik, but he was already gone. The doctors couldn't save him. They said it was too late. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Something happened that night. Something they're hiding." Auntie Nkechi stood up, her legs feeling weak beneath her. This was more than she had expected. The truth was starting to unfold, and it wasn't pretty. "Thank you, Musa," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "You've done more than you know. You've given me the truth." Musa nodded slowly, looking down. "I wish I could have done more. I wish I had been able to stop it." "You did what you could," Auntie Nkechi said. "Now I'll do what I can to make sure the truth comes out. For Chaik, and for Emeka." Later that evening, Auntie Nkechi met up with Uncle Obi at a small corner shop where they often spoke in private. She told him everything that Musa had shared, and he listened carefully, his face serious. "This is good, Auntie Nkechi," Uncle Obi said, rubbing his chin. "Musa's testimony is a big step forward. It's not everything we need, but it's enough to make things clearer." "I know," Auntie Nkechi said, glancing around nervously, "but we still need more. We need to find out what Chinedu and Ngozi did after that. What happened at the hospital. We need to piece together everything that happened that night." "I'll keep asking around," Uncle Obi said. "There's got to be someone who saw something. We'll find it." Auntie Nkechi nodded. but she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The Okekes would do anything to protect their secrets. And if they found out she was getting close, she didn't know what they might do. "Thank you, Obi," she said quietly, "but we have to move quickly. The more time passes, the more dangerous this becomes." He nodded. "I'll keep my ear to the ground. You keep doing what you're doing. We're getting closer, Auntie Nkechi. Can feel it." Auntie Nkechi couldn't help but feel a sense of dread as she walked back to her house that evening. The day had been long, and the weight of the investigation was taking its toll on her. But she couldn't stop now. She had to keep going. Emika's safety depended on it. When she arrived home, she was met with a surprise. There was a letter waiting for her at the door. She opened it quickly, and as she read the words inside, her stomach dropped. It was a warning, a threat. The Okekes knew she was getting closer to the truth, and they were warning her to stop. They wouldn't hesitate to make her disappear if she didn't back off. Auntie Nkechi's hands shook as she read the final line. Asterisk, stay away from Emika. This is your last warning. Asterisk. She folded the letter and stuffed it into her pocket, her face hardening with resolve. She wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. The night was quiet, but Auntie Nkechi couldn't shake the feeling that everything around her was closing in. The warning letter had left her shaken, but it hadn't stopped her. She knew now that the Okekes would do anything to protect their secrets, but she wasn't going to back down. Emika's safety and the truth about Chaik were more important than anything else. After reading the letter, she had spent the rest of the evening trying to clear her head. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. If she wanted to protect Emika, if she wanted justice for Chaik, she had to act quickly. Toby sat by her side, his usual calm demeanor now replaced by a watchful attention. He knew something was wrong, and he was ready to protect Auntie Nkechi no matter what. His presence was comforting, but Auntie Nkechi knew that the Real challenge was still ahead. The next morning, she decided it was time. Time to confront Chinedu and Ngozi once again. She couldn't wait any longer to expose them. She had the evidence. She had Musa's testimony. She had Mama Joy's account. The pieces were falling into place. Now, she needed to make sure they couldn't escape the truth. Auntie Nkechi walked to the Okeke house with Toby at her heels. Her heart raced, but her steps were steady. This time, she wasn't going to be intimidated. She wasn't going to be silenced. When she arrived at the gate, she noticed that the house was quieter than usual. It felt almost abandoned, like a house that knew it was about to be exposed for all its secrets. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. Ngozi answered, but this time her face was different. Her eyes were bloodshot, as if she hadn't slept in days. She looked wary, almost as if she had been expecting Auntie Nkechi to show up. "What do you want now?" Ngozi asked, her voice tight. "I'm here to talk about Chaik," Auntie Nkechi said calmly, her eyes never leaving Ngozi's. "I know the truth about what happened, and I'm not going to let you hide it anymore." Ngozi stepped back, a flicker of fear crossing her face before she quickly replaced it with anger. "I don't know what you think you know, but you're wrong. Nothing happened to Chaik. He was just a child. He was wild, out of control. He caused his own death." "You're lying, Ngozi," Auntie Nkechi said, her voice firm. "I spoke to the neighbors. I spoke to Musa. He heard the fighting. He heard Chaik crying. He knows you and Chinedu were responsible. You hurt him, and now you're trying to hurt Emika too. But I won't let you. Not again." Ngozi's face twisted in rage. "You have no right to come here and accuse us of things that aren't true. You don't know what it was like. You don't understand the pressure we were under." "I understand more than you think," Auntie Nkechi said, her voice steady. "I understand that you and Chinedu covered up what you did to Chaik. And I understand that you're trying to do the same to Emika. But I won't let you." As Auntie Nkechi spoke, she saw Chinedu walking toward them from the side of the house. His face was grim, and his eyes locked onto Auntie Nkechi with a look of pure hatred. "What's going on here?" Chinedu's voice was low, dangerous. "I'm here to talk about Chaik," Auntie Nkechi said, turning to face him. "I know what happened that night. I know what you did, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." Chinedu's jaw clenched, and his fists tightened at his sides. You need to leave. Now, he said, his voice cold. You don't know who you're messing with. I'm not going anywhere, Auntie Nkechi replied, standing her ground. You think you can scare me? You think you can intimidate me? I've seen the truth, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it. You'll never hurt Emeka like you hurt Chike. Chinedu's eyes flared with rage, and before Auntie Nkechi could react, he lunged at her, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the door. Get off me! Auntie Nkechi shouted, trying to break free. But Chinedu's grip was tight, and he pushed her against the wall, his face inches from hers. You're making a big mistake, he hissed. Toby let out a sharp growl and lunged at Chinedu, teeth bared. The dog's movement was quick and powerful, but Chinedu recoiled, letting go of Auntie Nkechi as he backed away, holding his hands up in defense. Stay away from her, Chinedu shouted, but Toby didn't move, standing his ground beside Auntie Nkechi. Auntie Nkechi was shaking, but she didn't back down. She had come too far to let fear stop her now. She looked Chinedu in the eyes and said, You can't keep hiding the truth. You and Ngozi are responsible for what happened to Chike, and now you're going to face the consequences. For a moment, Chinedu just stared at her, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then he spoke, his voice quieter but filled with venom. You think you can bring me down? You think you're going to win? You're nothing. You're just a woman with a dog and a bunch of lies. I'm not lying, Auntie Nkechi said firmly, and I won't stop until you pay for what you did to Chike. To Emeka, Chinedu's face twisted in anger, and for a second, Auntie Nkechi feared he might lash out again. But instead, he turned and walked back toward the door, his shoulders stiff with rage. You've made a big mistake, Auntie Nkechi, he said, his voice low and threatening. You don't know who you're dealing with. We're done here. Auntie Nkechi stood still, watching him as he entered the house, the door slamming shut behind him. Her heart was racing, but she didn't let herself show any weakness. She had confronted them. She had made her stand. And now she had to make sure the truth came out. But she knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Okekes would try to silence her, and they wouldn't stop until they had succeeded. But Auntie Nkechi wasn't going to let that happen. Not while Emeka's life was at risk. The days after her confrontation with the Okekes were tense. Auntie Nkechi could feel the weight of every moment, the constant pressure of knowing that the Okekes would stop at nothing to protect their lies. She had exposed them, but they hadn't been completely broken. The threat of their power still loomed over her, and she knew they wouldn't just give up. It had become clear to her that she couldn't do this alone anymore. She had already seen how far they would go to keep their secrets hidden, and now she was more determined than ever to ensure Emeka's safety. He deserved a life free from fear, and Auntie Nkechi was the only one who could give him that. Auntie Nkechi walked into Pastor Emmanuel's church early one morning, her mind racing with the thoughts of what to do next. She hadn't had a moment to herself in days, but she couldn't slow down now. She needed to make sure that Emeka was still safe and that everything she had done so far wasn't for nothing. When she entered the church, Pastor Emmanuel was already sitting in the back, going through some papers. He looked up as she walked in, his kind face lighting up with a welcoming smile. Auntie Nkechi, it's good to see you. What brings you here today? Pastor Emmanuel asked, standing up to greet her. I need to talk to you, Pastor, she said, her voice serious. It's about Emeka, and it's about the Okekes. Pastor Emmanuel nodded and motioned for her to sit. He had always been a man of great patience, and Auntie Nkechi appreciated that about him. She sat down, and he waited for her to speak. Pastor, she began, her voice tight with the weight of her words, I confronted Chinedu and Ngozi yesterday. I told them I knew the truth about what happened to Chike. I told them that they were responsible for his death, and that I wouldn't stop until the truth came out. Pastor Emmanuel's face grew serious. And how did they react? They tried to deny everything, she said, her voice quivering slightly. Chinedu got physical. He tried to grab me and threaten me, but Toby was there. He stopped him. I think they're scared now, Pastor. Scared of what might happen if the truth comes out. Pastor Emmanuel didn't speak right away. He sat back, his hands clasped in front of him. They're dangerous people, Auntie Nkechi, he said slowly. You've done something brave, but you must be careful. They'll do whatever it takes to protect themselves. I know, she said, her voice low, but I'm not going to stop. Not now. I've seen enough to know what they're capable of. And I'm not going to let them hurt Emeka. Pastor Emmanuel nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. You're a strong woman, Auntie Nkechi, but you're not alone in this. I'm with you, and the church will stand behind you too. We will help however we can. Auntie Nkechi felt a small sense of relief wash over her. She had been so focused on what might happen next that she had forgotten that there were people she could trust, people who would help her. Thank you, Pastor, she said, her voice steady now. I need to keep Emeka safe, but I also need to make sure that I get the evidence I need. I can't just accuse them without proof. I have to make sure that I'm doing this the right way. I understand, Pastor Emmanuel said. We'll make sure the right steps are taken. But you need to keep Emeka hidden for now. Keep him here with us for as long as necessary. If the Okekes come looking, they won't find him. Auntie Nkechi nodded gratefully. I'll keep him safe, Pastor. I just don't know what the Okekes will do next. You're not alone in this, Pastor Emmanuel said firmly. The church will protect you. You've done the right thing. We'll make sure the truth comes out. As the days passed, Auntie Nkechi took refuge in the church, keeping Emeka close and making sure that the Okekes couldn't find him. She spent her time gathering the evidence she needed. She spoke to more neighbors, more people who had been around when Chike died, trying to piece together every detail. Every piece of information was like a small victory, bringing her closer to exposing the Okekes and getting justice for both Chike and Emeka. But she knew she had to be careful. The Okekes were not going to give up quietly. They would try everything to silence her, to bury the truth, and she couldn't let that happen. One evening, Auntie Nkechi was sitting alone in the church, going through her notes. Toby lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, watching her intently. The sound of the church door creaking open startled her, and she looked up quickly. It was Uncle Obi. He stepped inside, looking around as though making sure no one was following him. His face was serious, and Auntie Nkechi immediately knew that something had happened. What is it, Obi? She asked, standing up. I've been speaking to some of the people who were close to the Okekes, Uncle Obi said, his voice low. And I found something that could change everything. Auntie Nkechi felt a rush of anticipation. What did you find? Uncle Obi glanced around again, making sure they were alone. He lowered his voice even more. I spoke to someone who worked with Chinedu at his business. They said that Chinedu had been acting strangely in the days before Chike's death. He was always angry, always upset, and sometimes he would leave work early. They think something was bothering him, something they never talked about. But what if it was about Chike? What if Chinedu had snapped? Auntie Nkechi's heart raced. So you think Chinedu might have been planning something? That he might have hurt Chike before the night he died? Uncle Obi nodded. It's possible. We need to look deeper. We need to find out what was really going on in those last few days. Auntie Nkechi felt her pulse quicken. She had just gotten another piece of the puzzle. This was the lead she had been waiting for. We need to get more information, she said. We need to find out what Chinedu was doing before Chike's death. If we can prove that he was planning something, we'll have everything we need. Uncle Obi's face darkened. And we need to be careful. The Okekes won't let this go easily. If they find out we're digging into their past, they'll do anything to stop us. Auntie Nkechi took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was ahead. I know, but we can't stop now. We're so close. Emeka deserves the truth. Chike deserves the truth. Uncle Obi placed a hand on her shoulder. We're with you, Auntie Nkechi. We'll make sure you're not alone in this. Auntie Nkechi looked at Toby, who was still lying quietly by her feet. He had been with her every step of the way, loyal and protective, just like he had been when he saved Emeka from the Okekes. She knew she had to keep going. She had to finish what she started. As the days turned into weeks, Auntie Nkechi's investigation continued. She spoke to more people, gathered more evidence, and pieced together the truth about Chike's death. Each discovery brought her closer to the truth, but it also made her realize just how far the Okekes were willing to go to cover up their past. And then, one afternoon, everything changed. Uncle Obi came to her with a look of shock on his face. "Auntie Nkechi, I've spoken to the police. They're going to investigate Chike's death. They're finally going to take it seriously." Auntie Nkechi's breath caught in her throat. "The police? They're going to investigate Chike's death." Uncle Obi nodded. "Yes, the evidence is there. The neighbors, the people who saw things, everything points to the Okekes. It's time for the truth to come out." Tears welled up in Auntie Nkechi's eyes. She had done it. She had fought for Emeka, for Chike, and now the truth was finally going to come out. It was a victory, but it was also just the beginning of a new chapter for Emeka. The fight wasn't over yet, but it was a fight that Auntie Nkechi knew she would win. She had the truth on her side, and with that she could finally breathe. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like they were heading in the right direction. Emeka's future was safe. The truth would be known.